In the winter of 1947, Los Angeles was a city of contrast sunlit boulevards, lined with palm trees by day, shadows stretching long and ominous under flickering neon by night, a place where dreams could be born in a single screen test or crushed in a whisper. And into this shimmering but treacherous world stepped Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old woman from Medford, Massachusetts, with a face that seemed sculpted for the silver screen and a presence that could turn heads in a crowded room. She had grown up far from the glitter of Hollywood, the daughter of Cleo and Phoebe Short, in a family fractured by her father's sudden disappearance when she was just a child, and that early loss left in her a restlessness that would follow her into adulthood, manifesting as a desire to keep moving, keep searching for the life she imagined. Friends described her as polite but mysterious, approachable yet guarded, and she had a knack for making even brief encounters feel significant. Perhaps because she was always so immaculately put together, most often in a fitted black tailored suit jacket over a crisp white blouse, a knee-length black skirt that swayed as she walked, black heels that clicked against the pavement. Her dark, wavy, shoulder-length hair catching the light, with a single white gardenia flower tucked neatly above her left ear, the flower's soft petals, a delicate frame for her bold red lipstick. In the early days of January 1947, Elizabeth was staying in Los Angeles after having drifted between various cities and acquaintances in recent months, her movements leaving behind a trail of acquaintances who remembered her beauty but often couldn't say much more, as if she lived her life in carefully curated fragments. On January 9th, she was last seen alive by those who knew her personally when Robert Red Manley, a salesman she had been casually seeing, drove her from San Diego to Los Angeles, saying she needed to meet her sister at the Biltmore Hotel downtown, and he recalled her seeming calm, cheerful even, as they pulled up outside the grand lobby, its marble floors gleaming, its chandeliers casting golden halos of light. But the moment she stepped inside, she seemed to disappear into the hum of the city. Staff remembered her lingering in the lobby for hours, making phone calls from the payphone bank, at times pacing slowly, the black suit and white blouse making her stand out from travelers and businessmen rushing past, her gardenia bright against the darker tones of winter coats around her. There were unconfirmed reports of her leaving the hotel to walk toward Olive Street. Others who swore they saw her later that week in cafes and bars across Los Angeles, sometimes alone, sometimes in the company of a man whose description varied, wildly depending on the teller. One said he was tall and well-dressed. Another insisted he was short and rough-looking, yet each story was united by the sense that Elizabeth, though poised and self-possessed, was preoccupied, perhaps even wary. Whispers spread quickly in those circles where nightlife and gossip intertwined. And by January 14th, if any of the sightings were real, she was walking a tightrope between anonymity and danger. The city itself becoming a labyrinth of shadows where a wrong turn could mean vanishing entirely, and vanish she did without warning. Without anyone raising an alarm, soon enough slipping out of the daily churn of Los Angeles, life as if the earth had swallowed her whole. For the next several days, no one who knew her well could say where she had gone or who she had been with. Though rumors multiplied, some claimed she was with an abusive lover. Others suggested she had been drawn into a criminal underworld she barely understood, and there were even whispers that she had stumbled upon something dangerous, knowledge, that could have made her a target. In truth, no one could know, and in those missing days the line between fact and speculation blurred beyond recognition. Yet the image of her walking away from the Biltmore remains the last verified moment, her polished shoes striking the pavement. In a steady rhythm, the January chill tugging at her skirt, the scent of the gardenia in her hair mixing with the faint aroma of cigarette smoke and car exhaust, it is that image, frozen in the minds of investigators and the public alike, that would soon take on a haunting significance. For within less than a week, the name Elizabeth Short would no longer be spoken in the hushed tones of admirers, but splashed in black ink across the front pages of newspapers from coast to coast, elegance and beauty now forever tied to a darkness no one could have anticipated. On the cold, still morning of January 15, 1947, Los Angeles awoke to the ordinary hum of life. unaware that in a vacant lot on Norton Avenue in Leimert Park, a discovery was about to be made that would sear itself into the city's memory forever. Betty Bersinger, a local housewife, was walking with her young daughter toward a shoe repair shop when she noticed what she initially thought was a discarded store mannequin lying on the grass just off the sidewalk, the pale, segmented form oddly placed, the sunlight glancing off its surface in a way that made it seem almost artificial. But as she drew closer, dread crept up her spine, for she realized this was no mannequin, and in the next heartbeat, her eyes locked onto the mutilated, lifeless body of a woman, naked. Bisected cleanly at the waist, her arms arranged above her head in a grotesque pose, her legs spread apart, the skin unnaturally pale and smooth, almost as if it had been washed. Bersinger clutched her child's hand tighter, turned, and fled toward the nearest house to call the police, her voice trembling as she tried to explain what she had seen, and within minutes, squad cars descended on the scene, their sirens cutting through the calm of the neighborhood. Officers quickly cordoned off the area, drawing curious residents from their porches. Whispers rippling through the crowd as the details emerged, a Glasgow smile carved into the corners of the victim's mouth, extending nearly to her ears. Deep gashes on her thighs and breasts, ligature marks around her wrists and ankles, and most chillingly, the surgical precision of the bisection, leading detectives to suspect someone with medical training or anatomical expertise. Her face, though marred by the brutality, was still recognizable when word spread that the victim was Elizabeth Short, the same young woman last seen days earlier in her tailored black suit and crisp white blouse. The city's undercurrent of fear turned to electric shock. Porters swarmed the lot almost immediately, their bulky cameras clicking, flashbulbs popping, while detectives like Harry Hansen and Finis Brown worked to preserve what little evidence there was: footprints in the dirt, tire tracks leading away from the scene, a cement sack nearby stained with what appeared to be blood. The body itself was devoid of clothing, yet those who had seen her alive could not help but overlay the memory of her signature. Look onto this tragic scene: the fitted black suit jacket over the white blouse, the knee-length skirt, the black heels, the gardenia tucked above her ear, clothing that was now absent but in the public's mind forever associated with her image. As the coroner's team examined her remains, they confirmed the body had been completely drained of blood, contributing to its ghostly pallor, and that the mutilation had occurred post-mortem, suggesting a killer who had not only the skill, but the time and privacy to perform such acts. The newspapers, eager to outdo one another, began printing lurid headlines before the day was over: "The Black Dahlia Killing." Some read, a moniker drawn from a recent noir film; "The Blue Dahlia," and from Elizabeth's own penchant for wearing black clothing, accented with a bright flower. By nightfall, the case had gone from a local tragedy to a national obsession. Wire services spreading the story from coast to coast, and the LAPD, now under immense pressure, launched one of the largest manhunts in the city's history. Detectives chased down every possible lead, from jilted lovers to underworld figures, from Hollywood hopefuls to former servicemen. Yet the sheer brutality and bizarre staging of the crime suggested a killer who was both calculating and confident, someone who believed they could leave a body in plain view and vanish without consequence. Forensic specialists took plaster casts of footprints, photographed tire impressions, and searched for fingerprints, but the scene yielded frustratingly little, perhaps because the killer had wiped everything clean, or perhaps because, as some whispered, the police were not as diligent as they claimed. In the days following the discovery, witnesses came forward with possible sightings of a dark sedan parked near the lot the night before, a man and woman arguing in hushed but heated tones, even a scream in the distance. Yet none of these accounts could be definitively linked to the crime. Meanwhile, the press continued to dig into Elizabeth's life, piecing together a narrative of a young woman who moved in and out of men's company, who aspired to the spotlight but never quite made it, who seemed to live on the edge of glamour and danger, and as the days passed, the vacant lot on Norton Avenue became a grim pilgrimage site, drawing crowds who stared at the earth where her body had lain, unable to reconcile the image of the elegant young woman in her black suit and Gardenia with the horrifying tableau that had been left behind. It was as if two versions of Elizabeth Short now existed in the public consciousness. One, the vibrant dreamer captured in fleeting memories, and the other, the victim whose final moments would forever remain hidden in the shadows between fact and speculation. In the days immediately following the discovery of Elizabeth Short's mutilated body, the Los Angeles Police Department was thrust into a maelstrom of public outrage, political pressure, and relentless media attention, the likes of which few murder cases had ever generated. Detectives Harry Hansen and Finis Brown, assigned to lead the investigation, quickly realized they were navigating not only a labyrinth of possible suspects and conflicting witness accounts, but also a feeding frenzy from newspapers desperate to outscoop each other, often at the cost of truth. The Los Angeles Examiner, one of the city's biggest papers, infamously called Elizabeth's mother in Medford, Massachusetts, pretending to inform her that her daughter had won a beauty contest in order to extract personal details before coldly revealing she had been murdered, and this early manipulation set the tone for what would become an ugly symbiosis between law enforcement and the police reporters, often had access to crime scene photos, autopsy details, and police theories. Before they were officially released, while detectives occasionally used the media to bait the killer or provoke leads, tips poured in from across the city and beyond, some from people claiming to have seen Elizabeth in her final days, others from self-proclaimed psychics, and still others from men and women confessing outright to the murder, more than 50 false confessions in the first few weeks alone, each one investigated and dismissed. The sheer number of suspects ballooned into the hundreds. Former lovers, casual acquaintances, strangers who had been seen speaking to her in bars or cafes, servicemen she had danced with at USO clubs, and shadowy figures linked to organized crime, but none could be tied definitively to the crime, and every lead seemed to unravel into nothing. Forensic analysis in 1947 was still limited, and while investigators combed over the few pieces of evidence from the Norton Avenue lot footprints, tire tracks, the blood-stained cement sack, they were left with more questions than answers. The coroner's report provided chilling clarity on the precision of the bisection, noting that it had been performed between the second and third lumbar vertebrae, cut requiring skill and disarticulation, leading police to focus on doctors, surgeons, and medical students, a pool of suspects that was large in post-war Los Angeles. Rumors began circulating about a certain physician with a penchant for violent behavior and connections to the city's elite. But at the time, there was no solid proof, and the case seemed to be spinning outward, pulling in countless names without landing on the right one. Meanwhile, the image of Elizabeth Short, the fitted black tailored suit jacket over her crisp white blouse, the knee-length black skirt, the black heels, the gardenia tucked above her dark waves appeared in newspapers and on newsreels across the country, her beauty both captivating and haunting to a public eager for answers. And as the weeks passed, the Black Dahlia became less a person in the eyes of many and more a symbol, a headline, a noir archetype of the tragic beauty, chewed up by the city's underbelly. The LAPD set up a special task force and even staged sting operations, planting false details in the press to see if the killer would respond. And in a chilling twist, he or someone claiming to be him did. On January 24th, the Examiner received a package containing some of Elizabeth's personal belongings, including her birth certificate, business cards, photographs, and an address book with a name cut out, all carefully cleaned with gasoline to remove fingerprints. The package came with a note pieced together from magazine letters reading, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." And sure enough, additional taunting notes trickled in. Some threatening further violence, others mocking the police's inability to catch him. But none of these leads brought them closer to an arrest. The investigation, while vast, was hampered by jurisdictional disputes, political meddling, and the sheer chaos of sorting credible witnesses from attention seekers. And by mid-February, the initial momentum began to slow, the case settling into the long, frustrating grind of dead ends. Yet the public's fascination didn't wane. In fact, it grew. fueled by Hollywood's proximity to the crime and the contrast between Elizabeth's elegant image and the savagery of her death. The press continued to print her photographs, often describing her in that same black suit and gardenia, as if clinging to the last intact version of her before the brutality erased it. And this repeated imagery cemented her in the cultural consciousness. As both victim and enigma, her life and death inseparable from the city's shadowed mythos. As the investigation into Elizabeth Short's murder stretched on without an arrest, the LAPD found itself drowning in theories, each one more sensational than the last, and over time, certain suspects began to stand out. Their names whispered in smoky bars, printed in suggestive headlines, and filed away in thick police dossiers. One of the most enduring and controversial was Dr. George Hodel, a wealthy, highly intelligent physician with a background in surgery, a taste for the avant-garde, and a reputation for moral depravity. Hodel's name first surfaced when detectives, revisiting the medical precision of the bisection, began cross-referencing area doctors with histories of violence or sexual misconduct. And his profile, with its chilling combination of skill, ego, and access to private facilities, fit too well to ignore. Hodel was known to mingle with artists, filmmakers, and the Hollywood elite, often hosting decadent parties in his Mayan revival-style mansion. And though no direct evidence initially tied him to the Black Dahlia case, suspicions grew when, in 1949, he was accused of sexually abusing his teenage daughter, an allegation that brought him under intense police scrutiny. Unbeknownst to him, the LAPD placed his home under surveillance in 1950. Bugging it with hidden microphones, and over weeks of recordings, detectives captured unsettling statements, including one that seemed almost like a confession. Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. Can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead. This single, chilling remark, combined with other cryptic, ominous comments, convinced some investigators that they were listening to the voice of the killer, yet for reasons still debated whether, due to lack of physical evidence, political connections, or fear of scandal, Hodel was never charged. And he eventually left the country, living abroad for years. Decades later, his own son, Steve Hodel, a retired LAPD homicide detective, would take up the case, poring over old files, photographs, and witness statements, ultimately writing several books arguing that his father not only killed Elizabeth Short but may have been responsible for other unsolved murders in the Los Angeles area, pointing to disturbing similarities in mutilation and staging. Beyond Hodel, there were other suspects who captured public imagination. Mark Hansen, the nightclub owner who reportedly let Elizabeth stay at his home on occasion. Leslie Dillon, a bellhop and aspiring writer whose letters to police contained suspiciously detailed knowledge of the crime, even a theory involving a woman killer. It's possibly motivated by jealousy or revenge, but each potential lead dissolved under scrutiny. The lack of definitive forensic evidence in 1947 proving the case's Achilles heel. Meanwhile, conspiracy theories flourished. Some claimed the murder was linked to a botched abortion performed by a high society doctor. Others suggested she was caught up in a prostitution ring that catered to powerful men, and still others argued that the crime was an elaborate art piece, staged to mimic surrealist works by artists like Man Ray, a friend of Hodel's. These theories, fueled by Hollywood's own dark glamour, blurred the line between fact and fiction, and in the public mind, Elizabeth Short became as much a character in a grim noir film as she was a real woman whose life was cut short. It all the image of her in her fitted, black-tailored suit jacket, crisp white blouse, knee-length black skirt, black heels, and gardenia tucked into her dark waves persisted. A haunting reminder of the vibrancy that had been stolen, and perhaps one reason her case endured in the cultural consciousness long after other murders of the era faded from memory. By the late 20th century, the Black Dahlia had inspired countless books, films, and documentaries, each retelling adding new flourishes. Sometimes at the expense of accuracy, but always reinforcing the enduring mystery of who could commit such an act and walk away untouched. And as the years passed, the case evolved from an active investigation to a cold case. its files still resting in LAPD archives, its secrets sealed behind the silence of the dead and the fading memories of the living. And yet, every so often, a new tip would surface. A forgotten document would be unearthed, or a photograph would emerge from an attic box, reigniting the debate, pulling yet another generation into the labyrinth that is the Black Dahlia mystery, where fact, rumor, and obsession are forever intertwined. In the decades since Elizabeth Short's murder, the Black Dahlia has transformed from a singular tragedy into one of the most enduring symbols of Los Angeles's dark underbelly. Her story told and retold in ways that blur the line between historical fact and noir-inspired myth, and part of what keeps her memory alive is the way her image-fitted black tailored suit jacket over a crisp white blouse. Knee-length black skirt, black heels, the gardenia tucked neatly into her dark waves became frozen in time. A perfect photograph of 1940s elegance that stood in stark contrast to the brutality of her death. Hollywood, ever attuned to stories steeped in glamour and darkness, embraced her as a muse, weaving her case into films, television shows, novels, and songs. From James Ellroy's 1987 crime novel The Black Dahlia and its later film adaptation, to subtle nods in episodes of American Horror Story and Cold Case, to countless documentaries that dissect every suspect in theory, often recycling the same grainy black and white photographs of her with that faint, knowing smile. For true crime enthusiasts, her case has become a template for the perfect mystery. Not because it was unsolvable in the strictest sense, but because it combined so many elements that ignite the imagination: youth, beauty, ambition, a city brimming with promise and corruption, a cast of possible villains drawn from all walks of life, and a crime scene so surreal in its staging that it seemed ripped from the pages of a pulp novel. Cultural historians argue that the Black Dahlia case marked a turning point in America's relationship with crime reporting, ushering in an era where sensationalism often overshadowed fact, where a victim's personal life could be picked apart and reassembled into whatever narrative sold the most papers, and where the public's appetite for mystery was matched only by its tolerance for invasive speculation. For Los Angeles, the case became part of its own mythology, woven into the same fabric as the Hollywood sign, the Sunset Strip, and the notion that beneath the California sun lies an ever-present shadow. Even in the 21st century, amateur sleuths, podcasters, and YouTubers keep the investigation alive in digital form, dissecting autopsy reports, cross-referencing police statements, and visiting the still-empty lot on Norton Avenue, which remains eerily unchanged, an unmarked memorial to a crime scene that once brought the city to a halt. Forensic science has advanced dramatically since 1947, leading some to believe that one day DNA testing on preserved evidence might yield an answer. Though the LAPD remains guarded about what, if any, biological samples from the case still exist, yet part of the case's strange endurance may lie in the fact that it is unsolved closure. While comforting tends to dim the spotlight, whereas mystery invites endless retelling. Each version reshaping Elizabeth into someone new: the innocent dreamer, the troubled wanderer, the femme fatale, the victim of a powerful conspiracy. Her story resonates not just because of what happened, but because of what we don't know. The unanswered questions that force each generation to imagine their own ending. And perhaps, if one were to stand in that vacant lot today, as the wind cuts through the grass and the sun dips behind the Los Angeles skyline, they might feel the same chill that rippled through the city all those years ago, when a young woman's life and the image of her in that black suit and white blouse were forever etched into the city's soul. A haunting reminder that in Los Angeles, beauty and tragedy often walk hand in hand, and that some mysteries are destined to remain unsolved. It's not because they can't be solved, but because they've become something larger, part truth, part legend, part cautionary tale. And in that delicate balance, the Black Dahlia's legacy will likely live on for another 80 years, whispered about in coffee shops, debated in late-night forums, and revisited by storytellers like us, who can't help but be drawn to the shadow her story still casts over the city of dreams.